join us as we turn back the clock to remember 30 reasons why growing up in the 60s was truly the best thing ever. You played outside until the streetlights came on. In the 1960s, childhood meant unstructured freedom. Kids were allowed to explore the world around them without constant supervision. This was the era of long bike rides. Building homemade forts was normal. Playing hide and seek in the park or yard was just what we did. There were no phones. No notifications interrupted us. There was only pure imagination and fresh air. It's different from today. Today, most people panic if they aren't stimulated every second. But the generation that grew up in the 60s learned how to be friends with boredom. We learned to create our own fun. We developed the ability to entertain ourselves without needing constant stimulation. This quiet capacity is rare in modern culture. Life moved slower, and that was wonderful. It let you be completely present in that moment. You weren't distracted by 24/7 media. Saturday morning cartoons were sacred. Before hundreds of TV channels and streaming platforms existed, watching TV wasn't a habit, it was an event. You only had one chance all week on Saturday morning to see your favorite cartoons. That made them sacred. This turned Saturday morning into a highly anticipated cultural ritual. Families and friends often gathered together for it. The scarcity of content increased the value of every single show. However, family entertainment in the 60s didn't stop at cartoons. This was also the decade when Disney released their biggest hit, Mary Poppins, 1964. It was a classic live-action movie with impressive technical work and a healthy spirit. Plus, cozy police procedural shows like Dixon of Dock Green also made us feel like all was right with the world. Music changed everything. The 1960s saw a massive explosion of popular music. It created an undeniable cultural revolution. Bands like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, along with the lively Motown sound, created the soundtrack for a generation growing up. This is the decade where modern music, as we know it, began. Music back then wasn't just background noise, it was rebellion. Rock and roll became more dangerous, paving the way for groundbreaking events like Woodstock 1969. What was truly special was how we consumed music. You listened to a vinyl record from start to finish. Just as the artist intended, it wasn't shuffled. You studied the album cover, you learned the lyrics, and you shared vinyl records like they were treasures. Toys were built to last and encouraged interaction. If you grew up in the 60s, toys weren't things you played with for a few days and then threw away. They were companions throughout your entire childhood. They felt solid in your hand. They were heavy enough. They felt like real things, not flimsy plastic. You could build a castle with Lincoln logs, knock it down, and rebuild it 100 times, and those logs still fit snugly. You could sit for hours with your Etch-a-Sketch, your Viewmaster, your dolls, or your model cars. Every time you played, it was a brand new story. It never repeated, and the Easy Bake Oven was the perfect childhood experiment. You turned it on, you smelled the sweet cake. And as a kid, you felt like you were doing something truly grown up. The best part? Toys back then forced you to use your hands, your head, and your imagination. There was no autoplay button. There was no pre-recorded music to keep you quiet. You had to invent the rules of the game. You assigned the roles. You negotiated. Games like Cluedo, or other board games often happened right on the kitchen table. The whole family or a group of kids would argue over clues, then laugh out loud when someone guessed wrong. And when a toy broke, many kids even learned how to fix it. They glued the wheel back on, they tightened the screw, they untangled the strings. It was a small lesson in patience. Ultimately, 1960s toys weren't just meant to kill time. They taught you how to create joy together using the simplest things. Do you remember a toy that you played with until the memory wore thin? Families ate dinner together every night. The family dinner ritual was a solid tradition. It was one of the important traditional values of the 1960s. When the dinner time arrived, the television was turned off. Phones didn't exist yet, and the whole family automatically gathered around the table. No one was rushed. No one ate while looking at a screen. There was only warm food, the sound of forks and spoons clinking, and everyday conversation. Dinner was when parents asked, "How was school today?" It was when kids talked about winning or losing on the sports field. They talked about a hard test or some silly thing that happened during recess. There were no quick texts. There were no emojis. Every emotion was spoken aloud with words, with eye contact, and with voice inflection. Children learned how to listen. They learned to wait their turn to speak. And they learned to look directly at the person they were talking to. These were social skills that were never taught in books, but they stayed with them throughout their entire lives. More importantly, dinner was an emotional anchor. No matter how tired the day had been, no matter what turmoil was happening in the world outside, the family still sat together in the evening. That brief moment created a sense of safety, stability, and connection. It's something many who grew up later only realized they once had. For the 60s generation, family wasn't something that interrupted a busy schedule. Family was the center of the day, and those simple dinners quietly taught them about respect, responsibility, and the value of truly being present together. School was strict, but it worked. The education system in the 60s was characterized by strictness and discipline, where teachers were deeply respected. But this strictness came along with major academic reform. After the Soviet Union launched the Sputnik 1 satellite in 1957, the United States had to take national action due to the fear of falling behind. This response, known as the Sputnik Crisis, led the U.S. Congress to pass the National Defense Education Act in 1958. This act spent over $1 billion to overhaul education. It heavily emphasized mathematics and the physical sciences in American schools. The goal was to overtake the Soviet Union and prove technical dominance. Therefore, despite the tight discipline, children who grew up in the 60s left school with solid reading, writing, and arithmetic skills. They benefited from the technical focus that followed the space race. You could walk to the corner store. In the 60s, it was totally normal for a kid around 9 or 10 years old to hold a few coins in their hand and walk by themselves to the corner store. No adult needed to come along, no one called to check up. The entire neighborhood seemed to look out for one another naturally. The store owner knew your face. They knew whose kid you were. They might even ask, "How's your mom doing lately?" That trust didn't need to be spoken, but everyone understood it. Those short trips were a first lesson in independence. You learned how to count money. You chose what you wanted, and you brought home exactly what you were asked to get. With just a few pennies, you could buy a candy bar or a bottle of soda. Sometimes you even had change left over to put in your pocket. That feeling of childish wealth is still fun to think about now. It wasn't about having a lot. It was about having just enough. That freedom also spread out onto the quiet streets. Kids rode their bikes all over the neighborhood. They stopped by friends' houses. They rode around until dusk. Traffic wasn't heavy or noisy. There were no helmets, no schedules, and no constant fear. There was just the wind, the crunching sound of bike tires, and the feeling that the whole world was within reach. It was a slower pace of life. It was where kids were practicing being grown-ups little by little, and adults trusted that the world around them was safe enough to let that happen. Do you remember the corner store near your house? And what snack did you buy most often on those trips? Life moved slower, and that was great. Life in the 60s moved at a more human speed. It lacked the explosion of 24/7 media and constant notifications. This slower pace created space for boredom, and that very boredom spurred creativity. You had time to think, to build things, or simply to daydream. Furthermore, this generation also learned how to live with ambiguity. The 1960s broke down many clear answers about how the world worked. It forced you to accept that uncertainty is a part of life. You didn't need everything to be neatly packaged in a simple explanation. This acceptance is a rare quality in the age of seeking instant gratification. Rock and roll was dangerous, and that was the point. Rock and roll in the 60s wasn't just entertainment, it was a statement. Elvis might have shaken things up in the 50s, but the 60s pushed the boundaries of rebellion to a new level. It became the catalyst for a moral revolution. Music was one of the biggest factors creating cultural change in this decade. Bands like the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Jefferson Airplane, Janis Joplin, and Aretha Franklin provided the soundtrack for the social revolution. This was the era of psychedelia and the explosion of diverse music styles. It laid the groundwork for modern pop culture where people easily have access to great musical experiences. The climax was the Woodstock 1969 event. Their music and the hippie spirit blended into a symbol of freedom and protest. Growing up during this time meant witnessing a moral revolution. Old lifestyles and values were challenged. That danger and challenging spirit wasn't just aimless rebellion. It was a call for collective action, showing the belief that individuals working together could change laws and create big movements. Summers were completely unscheduled. Unlike today's heavily scheduled summers, the summers of the 60s were a time completely without structure and without a fixed schedule. No summer camps, no phones bothering you. Just 3 months of pure freedom. This lack of constant stimulation forced children to learn how to create their own fun every day. This trained creativity and the ability to entertain yourself without adult interference. It created a quiet kind of self-assurance. When there were no notifications or algorithms, you learned how to sit with your own thoughts, read a book, or simply daydream. Furthermore, these unscheduled summer months also strengthened the ability to deal with ambiguity. You didn't need everything to be clearly explained or neatly packaged in a binary choice. The uncertainty of tomorrow was actually part of the excitement of being a kid. You grew up without needing constant external validation because you knew how to enjoy the quiet moments. Fashion became cooler and truly unique. The 60s saw a massive shift in style. It marked the end of the strict norms that came before. Many consider it the decade with the greatest style and fashion. Bell-bottoms, tie-dye, fringed jackets. The 60s look was expressive, wild, and undeniably individual. Growing up in this era, you were encouraged to show your personal style. You weren't constrained by conformity or brand loyalty. This created a sharp difference from the conformist 50s. Although the styles were unique and new, dressing was simpler. You only needed a few dresses, 2 pairs of pants, and 2 shirts. This simplicity also freed adults from washing clothes by hand. Thanks to automatic washing machines, mothers didn't worry too much if their kids' clothes got dirty playing outside. 60s fashion was a direct reflection of the counterculture spirit that spread everywhere, from the cities to college campuses. Drive-in movie theaters was the best date. Drive-in movie theaters are an icon of pure Americana. They represented simple, romantic evenings, and the feeling of piling the whole family into the station wagon to watch a movie under the stars is an unforgettable memory. It combined the comfort of family with the excitement of a night out. This is a beautiful image of prioritizing face-to-face connection and presence. Even in the limited space of the car, the drive-in was still a social experience. Young people could enjoy freedom in the back seat. It was completely different from the cramped space of a traditional movie theater. This reinforces the idea that the joy of the 60s came from real connection and shared experiences. With the streets being happily quiet and without much traffic, driving out to see a movie also provided an easier feeling of freedom, unlike today's crowded city life. You could play sports without tryouts. In the 60s, sports didn't necessarily have to be serious or highly competitive. Impromptu baseball or football pickup games happened often. There were no uniforms, no pressure, and no need for formal tryouts. All you needed was a ball and a few neighborhood friends. This is a complete contrast to today's highly organized and structured sports culture. Kids learned how to negotiate. They resolved conflicts, and they built friendships in the backyard of the park where the rules were agreed upon right on the spot. The lack of adult intervention in these games helped develop self-reliance and confidence because you weren't dependent on constant validation from others. Plus, since life moved slower, you had plenty of free time to join these spontaneous physical activities. TV was an event, not a habit. With a limited number of channels, watching TV in the 60s was a special event, a family ritual. Families gathered around the screen to watch popular shows like The Andy Griffith Show or Gilligan's Island. There was no fast-forward feature, and there was no on-demand viewing. And commercials were considered an integral part of the experience. Even light entertainment shows reinforced the feeling that all was right with the world. For example, cozy police shows like Dixon of Dock Green began with immortal greetings. That meant viewers didn't have to go to bed worried. This is the opposite of TV today, where people often watch alone and the content is endless. Back then, watching TV was a shared experience between family members and the community. The radio was your best friend. Before digital music platforms existed, AM radio was the primary source for a generation's music discovery. It was a powerful tool for connection. M stations played everything from the Supremes to Johnny Cash, all on the same dial. This forced you to explore and listen to many different genres instead of just skipping songs that weren't your taste. Listening to the radio often went hand in hand with another behavior that enriched the music experience. You listened to the record from beginning to end. Music was a structured journey. You studied the album cover, You learned the lyrics, and you shared vinyl records like they were treasures. This created a deeper appreciation for the music and the artists, a quality this generation still carries. Science fiction reached new heights. The 60s was when science fiction stopped being just entertainment. It started asking big questions about humanity, technology, and the future. The context of the space race made the whole world look up at the sky with real excitement. Every rocket launch, every piece of news about the moon caused the public imagination to explode, and cinema captured that spirit perfectly. The absolute peak must be Stanley Kubrick's 2001, A Space Odyssey. Now, this wasn't a movie that explained everything or catered to the audience. It was slow, cold, and full of silences. It forced the viewer to think for themselves. From the origins of mankind to the artificial intelligence HAL 9000, the film asked a terrifying question. What if technology surpassed human control? For many audience members back then, this was the first time they left the theater not because the movie was over, but because their minds were still reeling. In the same year, 1968, Planet of the Apes also caused a strong shockwave. The story of an astronaut lost in a world ruled by apes wasn't just fiction. It was a mirror reflecting the anxieties of the era, war, power, and human arrogance in the nuclear age. The ending left the audience stunned. They realized that science fiction sometimes tells the truth in the most frightening way. You had to wait for everything, and that made it sweeter. This was an era that lacked instant gratification. This unintentionally taught the generation an important lesson about patience. Hey, if you took photos with a film camera, you had to wait several days for the film to be developed. Letters could take a week to reach the recipient. This delay wasn't seen as an inconvenience, it was a natural part of life. You learned to accept that things arrived naturally. Even in cinema, films like Lawrence of Arabia, 1962, were a spectacular adventure epic. They required the audience to patiently follow an extended, grand story. This is far removed from the fast-cut pace of modern media. The waiting made you appreciate those moments more. This patience became an integrated part of daily life, from the TV schedule to standing in line. The 60s generation knew that good things come to those who wait. You instinctively questioned authority. Growing up in the 60s meant witnessing established power systems being challenged on every front. You saw the civil rights protests, you saw widespread marches against the Vietnam War, and you saw young people refusing to accept the social status quo. This installed a deep trait in your mind, instinctively questioning authority. You didn't accept the answer because I said so. You wanted to understand the reason, and if the argument wasn't strong, you weren't afraid to resist. This wasn't about being difficult, it was about intellectual honesty. This generation learned early on that power structures were not infallible. Sometimes they needed to be questioned, reformed, or completely torn down. This deep mistrust of the government is one of the major turning points in American culture achieved in the 60s. Still with us on this nostalgic journey? Drop a yes in the comments so we know you're enjoying it. You believed in collective action. The 60s was a decade of powerful social movements. It was a time when people believed in the power of acting together. You witnessed individuals working together who could change laws. They created big movements like the civil rights movement or the environmental movement. Psychology calls this the common belief in the collective power to produce desired outcomes as a crucial component of collective action. For the 60s generation, this wasn't an abstract concept. They experienced it directly. This belief makes you skeptical of purely individual approaches. You knew that some issues require collective solutions. Even cinematic works like To Kill a Mockingbird, 1962, conveyed to generations the importance of standing up for what is right, even when justice is scarce, through the image of the lawyer, Atticus Finch. Freedom came with responsibility. The 60s is often remembered as a time of freedom. Freedom of thought, freedom of expression, freedom to question. But those who truly grew up during that time understood one thing very clearly. Freedom was never irresponsible. It wasn't about doing whatever you wanted. It was about daring to choose and then taking responsibility for your choices. The social movements that exploded in the 60s were not random chaos. From the civil rights movement to the war protests, every change required organization, discipline, and personal sacrifice. Young people learned that speaking out was necessary, but action was even more important. And every action has consequences. You had the right to be suspicious of the government, power, and corporations. But you also had the responsibility to participate in building something better, not just standing on the sidelines complaining. That spirit was also strongly reflected in pop culture. Movies like Cool Hand Luke didn't glorify blind rebellion. Instead, they celebrated individual courage, maintaining character, composure, and principles even in harsh circumstances. The character didn't win through strength. He won by not letting the system crush the human being inside him. Growing up in the 60s, you carried a rare balance. You loved freedom, but without illusion. You were suspicious of power, but you still believed in personal responsibility and community strength. That's why this generation could both resist and build, both question and step up to take charge. You played outside until the streetlights came on. In the 1960s, childhood meant unstructured freedom. Kids were allowed to explore the world around them without constant supervision. This was the era of long bike rides. Building homemade forts was normal. Playing hide and seek in the park or yard was just what we did. There were no phones. No notifications interrupted us. There was only pure imagination and fresh air. It's different from today. Today, most people panic if they aren't stimulated every second. But the generation that grew up in the 60s learned how to be friends with boredom. We learned to create our own fun. We developed the ability to entertain ourselves without needing constant stimulation. This quiet capacity is rare in modern culture. Life moved slower, and that was wonderful. It let you be completely present in that moment. You weren't distracted by 24/7 media. You lived through an era where the good things were still recognized, even amidst major conflicts like the Cold War. You benefited from the scientific and technical advances like microchips that the space race brought. But at the same time, you could still play outside without a schedule, without a phone, until the streetlights came on. It was a unique combination of old-fashioned and Please hit the subscribe button and share this video so we can continue bringing you emotional stories about the time of our parents and grandparents. We will see you in the next video.